Here we go. So everyone hopefully should be able to see that, all being well.
Yes.
So Paul's topic of choice, and so therefore my topic of choice, was change before you have to. So a little bit about sort of the various journeys towards change. Obviously, a lot of our examples relate to EVs and the process of getting people into those, but actually it's quite a lot broader than just that. So a little bit about who am I? Why am I talking to you today? Well, that's me in cartoon form. I am known in the office as the bearded EV guy or the bearded van guy. I have been working in small businesses for around 20 years. I'm currently a senior consultant for Vehicle Consulting Solent, who, like I said, pop people into EVs, guide people through the process. But more importantly than that, I've been in small business for a significant amount of time, and my main sort of over that period of time was about leading and delivering change inside businesses, and that wasn't just related to EVs, although that did form a part of my sort of journey even before I worked for Vehicle Consulting, but was also about the changing industry of small business and bringing manufacturing to sort of local communities, how we did that, and implementing environmental and sustainable policies in throughout the team that I was working with. And simply, my motivation behind all of this is I'm quite passionate about leaving a sort of better future for my kids than I was left from my parents. So trying to make a little bit of change for the good each and every day. So why is sustainability important to your business? Well, I'm going to throw you back to what business looked like 10 years ago. In an era pre-COVID, the world was a different place. People were going to sort of little takeaway vans and picking up polystyrene cups full of hot coffee. You were able to get your own plastic bags from the supermarkets, go and get a sort of drink with a plastic straw, and solar panels were still in their early days, charging sort of mobile phone batteries. And the reason I mention all of that is because change is an inevitable part of business, regardless of sort of what it looks like in which areas, and will continue to be an inevitable part of business. Ideas become outdated, trends sort of go through and adjust what the normal is, and ultimately there is a shared message that underlies that behind all of it. Typically, change gets led from the top in terms of governance, in terms of policy, and in terms of business as well. And leaders in business ultimately are the starting point for changes that can be made. One of the examples that we've got at the moment is EVs, and there's obviously a push towards using more EVs throughout business themselves, but it's not just related to that. And one of my previous roles, we were looking at changes that were impacted from COVID. We were buying in loose fill packing materials, and we were using the biodegradable ones because the polystyrene ones were outdated and sort of frowned upon. But we were transporting them on lorries. We were going through and using sort of many miles of transportation to move them from Wales down to the Isle of Wight, which is where I'm based. We were sort of using boats, we were using sort of large Arctics, and we were transporting a full Arctic each time to bring it down. And anyone who knows the sort of biodegradable packing peanuts, they're mostly air. So we were paying some lovely lorry driver to transport air for the most part, which seemed largely counterintuitive. So we invested in going through and buying a loose fill manufacturing facility, and we brought that down to the island and realised that our Arctic load of packing peanuts could be condensed down into 8 pallet spaces, shipped down, and we could then produce and control that environment. But we didn't just do it because of the sort of transport costs, although that flagged it to us. There was also the sort of understanding that our customers wanted to know where that product was, how it was sort of made, what was in it, because they were passing it on. And we were dealing with some of the largest cosmetic companies in the world, using this packaging material from the little old Isle of Wight. So that was largely guided by what our customers were asking, and they were holding us to a higher standard in terms of a social responsibility. And we see that now in more and more aspects of business. Customers aren't just interested in sort of the simple little, what have you got for sale, but also in how do you get to that, and sort of what's the journey that follows. So, and in terms of business, that's obviously led by business. Now, it often starts with the bigger businesses. The larger corporations have more governance put on them. They're led to make changes that smaller businesses maybe aren't able to yet, or will need to learn from, or need the infrastructure in place. So big business is typically where it starts. And ultimately, one of our largest customers is one of the sort of largest manufacturing companies in the UK. They go through and produce all sorts of large government infrastructure policies and projects. And they were a couple of years ago started to be held to account for their scope 3 emissions. So that's the emissions that not just they're producing, but their wider infrastructure is producing. And they were guided by policy into a change that is now becoming a social norm. So businesses from the top are sort of being guided into change for the better on a social and governance side. So policy approach, who does it benefit? Ultimately, it's everyone. So a couple of terms that, or one term that I heard, I think it was Mike using, it's ESG. So the environmental, social and governance sort of set of standards, which is a way of measuring the business's impact on society. And there's also CSR, corporate social responsibility, which is where businesses are held to account for the sort of wider sort of locality. And I can see that in terms of the sort of business partnership, how sort of everyone's gathering together to go through and improve business as a community aspect rather than just an individual. So the policy approach, ultimately it sort of holds a sort of business and its wider audience to a high standard. However, on smaller businesses, you get some of the benefits of that too. So the government infrastructure and the sort of social agenda that they put out will get adopted. A larger sort of growth on infrastructure in terms of charging networks or in terms of solar pickup will then be adopted. And larger business typically will set the sort of legislation there so that it's clear for smaller businesses as well. So the governance is the starting point, but then it comes a sort of wider social adoption. And that's where we start coming into the process in terms of helping people and businesses translate from what a law means into sort of how they can use it. And the reason that we're so-called vehicle consulting is because it's not just about what we want to go through and push as an agenda. We are a lease broker, but the journey is about listening to sort of what people are sort of wanting and how they're sort of understanding the world, and then feeding in the right information, giving some learning and guidance along the way. One of the customers that I had this week said to me in the first introductory call that he'd been looking at the various policies regarding electric cars for just over a year, and every time he started looking at them, he couldn't quite understand how he could make the most out of it. And it was one of those where business ultimately can lead them down the right path, translate that information into a sort of usable method and usable delivery for smaller businesses. So, change before you have to. What do we mean by that? Well, at the moment, the government have got, the current government, should I say, have got a timescale of 2035 for electric cars and sort of zero tailpipe emission vehicles being the sort of 100% of vehicle sales. And in 2035, there'll be no petrol or diesel vehicles that emit tailpipe emissions being sold at all. The likelihood is that that might be brought forwards if a Labour government come in, and that will then look like it's going to be 2030. And around sort of the sort of electrification of the vehicle industry, there is a lot of learning that needs to take place. You'll all have seen the electric car fires go through the press. You'll have seen sort of how range is a sort of terrible, terrible thing, and you won't get down the road unless you charge 3 times. There's absolutely no way that you can travel more than about an hour. And there's no way of going through and charging when you get there because all the chargers are in use. Those are just a few of the whatabouteries that come with electrification of vehicles. I can happily tell you that all of them are false, and the sort of the amount of whataboutery that comes with this topic is quite significant. The reason Paul isn't here today is because he's currently in a lovely little remote Scottish Highland location with no Wi-Fi. Strangely, he took his electric vehicle all the way up from little old Isle of Wight on the south coast, right up to Scotland with 2 children in the back and a wife in the passenger seat on a bank holiday weekend, using the public charging network to go through and charge his vehicle up. And he did that very deliberately. He is a glutton for punishment, but he also wants to prove that electric vehicles actually are very usable in this day and age, and not all of the issues that people talk about are real issues out there. He, however, has been on this journey a lot longer than most, and in order to get people to that point, there is a lot of learning that needs to be shared. And we do that in a silly way in some cases. There's a lot of social media posts that are very tongue-in-cheek to go through and share about that. But it is here and it's here to stay. And we're very grateful for that because we think it's a great move in the right way in terms of a social change and a sustainable change for businesses and end users alike. And again, I just wanted to flag some of the sort of changes that have happened in business at this point, that actually when we talk about changes and we talk about sort of development and where we are in terms of the electrification of vehicles, we're still on that sort of leading edge. And the quicker that people get on board and the sort of the earlier that they change before they have to, the more benefit they get out of it. And if you think back to a time where IT sort of wasn't really a part of business. There were a couple of businesses I was involved with which were totally IT free when we first got into them. And the changes, the sort of staff reductions that were made when IT came along and started sort of being used as a significant part. When you look at things like the internet and the early stages of adoption and people saying that that's not going to catch on, it's a 5-minute thing. And lo and behold, it's still here, and we're holding a sort of a video call talking to someone across the stretch of water today. And mobile phones as well. The sort of the short-term sort of thoughts on that was that it wasn't going to be a sort of long-term solution, and then we sort of adjust to websites being made specifically for mobile phone use because that's where the most eyeballs are and the sort of most businesses these days. So ultimately, changing before you have to allows you to do the learning very, very quickly and to do a lot more learning before it's then needed to be part of normal business life. Imagine going back and sort of not having used a computer for the last 10 years and sort of me plonking one down on the desk today and saying it's going to change your life, but you need to do all the learning today. Yeah, you'd have wished you'd started 10 years ago, 20 years ago even. So a few suggestions from my side of things in terms of sort of what's out there, and sort of where you can make the most out of it. In terms of electrification of vehicles, ultimately, one of the earliest changes that you'll see is fuel savings on there. Particularly if you can charge at work or at home. There are still grants available to allow you to make the most out of sort of workplace or home charging for the business. They are great. You can get the benefits of solar. I'm sure Mike will nod in agreement, but going through and using free energy to sort of make your business run is a very satisfying feeling. We had an old school dial meter at my previous business that used to run backwards on a sunny day, and it gave me great joy to know that there were 6 months in the summer where we didn't have to pay a single penny in electricity. And the electricity companies couldn't work out why. We did tell them that we had an old meter and they needed to change it, but it was still very enjoyable to turn down the first 5 estimated bills and pay the 6th one with a very small amount. So workplace charging. There are obviously some huge tax advantages at the moment. Commercial leases are offsettable against VAT. If you've got a commercial vehicle, it's fully offsettable. If you've got a sort of car, it's 50% of the VAT can be claimed back. You've obviously got the benefits of being able to offset against your corporation tax and pass on a low benefit in kind if it's going to be used by a staff member. And there are staff benefits, and ultimately the biggest benefit at the moment is the salary sacrifice scheme, which is not dissimilar to the cycle to work scheme, except with less effort. You don't have to pedal quite as hard when you're in an electric vehicle, which is always lovely to see. So the salary sacrifice schemes that are out there allow you to, as a company, pass on the benefits of your buying power and your leasing ability, and then go through and give that to the end user, to your staff member or staff member's partner, whilst taking the low benefit in kind, so reducing down on national insurance contributions, both from an employee or from a employer's perspective, but also saving on income tax and a number of other little adjustments as well. Ultimately, that then can save a couple of £100 off a employee's contract hire if they're doing it. It allows them to deliver something like a Tesla for the price of a Hyundai i10, and if anyone knows, that's the cheapest, smallest vehicle on the market at the moment. And the great bit about it is that it doesn't cost the business if it's set up right. So that can be applied for anyone from a director right the way through to a sort of multinational business or an individual sort of sole trader with sort of various different levels. So that is pretty much me. I always like to leave people with a little quote before I start asking questions. And this is one of my favourite phrases by a man called John Ruskin. It's unwise to pay too much, but it's even worse to pay too little. When you pay too much, you lose a little money, that is all. But when you pay too little, sometimes you lose everything, because the thing that you bought was incapable of doing the thing that it was bought to do. So that's me. I think I've made it to about 15 minutes in terms of presentation. Has anyone got any questions? Anything that sort of they want to have asked and answered?
Thanks, Julian. If you could just stop sharing, then we can see everyone.
Okay, yep.
A bit bigger.
So let me just...
Good.
There we go.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for the clarity of that. And that was really helpful. And there's a lot to think about and to discuss. So anyone want to challenge or find out more? Yeah, Tim, go for it.
I was just going to ask about the grid capacity. If everyone did go to electric, we're assuming the grid capacity is there, or they've got a lot of work to do on the electricity grid.
So that's a good question. I think it depends on the time of sort of charging for everyone. So during the day, the grid capacity is obviously used a lot more, and ultimately there's a lot less capacity on there. from my looking at it, for the amount of people that are currently transitioning to electric vehicles, the grid capacity is there at the moment. And as people go across, we think that there should be enough capacity to sort of go along with the change as well. The local area that we've got on the Isle of Wight, we've done a lot of looking into, because it's a rural area, there's not a lot of infrastructure. And strangely, when I started digging into it, I actually spoke to a window cleaner who was cleaning the solar panels on one of the large solar farms. And he said, you wouldn't believe it, but they're actually turned off during the summer. They produce too much electricity to be used up. And so that's a really strange thing. Why? What on earth is going on there? He said, yeah, there's no way of transporting enough electricity back to mainland UK, and there's no way of dealing with it. And one of the sort of great things about electric vehicles is potentially the vehicle to grid sort of systems that can be used to help supplement. So being able to use the energy at certain points in the day, being able to draw it down into large battery capacity vehicles and then deliver that back when the grid needs, there's a lot that can be developed there as well. So grid capacity is a very interesting one, and I think where we are at the moment, there is enough capacity for people to have vehicles. As it grows and changes, I believe that the way we use them and the way we use the vehicles to help and support that will change as well. And I suspect there'll be a sort of a change in use. It's a bit like having a petrol station that goes both ways. That sort of when you plug in, you can sometimes get some petrol, but you can also give some back if it works out. An interesting concept we've not had to deal with just yet, but I'm excited by how it develops. Rob.
Julian, there were incentives, I think, for installation of charging points.
There are
still around.
They are indeed, yes. So at the moment, I think for workplaces, there's a £350 grant, but there is also a lot of public charging infrastructure that has grants funding available as well. So being able to put in large sort of commercial and high-speed chargers, there's actually funding that's going around from the government to improve the local infrastructure. We've just had a grant, and I think it's for 500 sort of publicly available charge points on the Isle of Wight that's come down from central government. And they're going to be installing those over the next 3 to 5 years. So there are chunks of money that are still floating about, and certainly central government is very much behind this as a sort of a method of delivering the zero tailpipe emissions to the masses. There are also a great deal of currently existing public infrastructure charges as well. So the sort of grant funding brings another 500, but we were looking as part of our learning the other day, and I think there's 121 potential public charging points on the island. Which when you consider that we typically don't see most of those in use, I can drive to any one of their car parks now and find at least sort of 5 out of the 6 still available. I think there's a lot that is there already and a lot that will continue to go. But yeah, there's pockets of money both for at home, for workplace and for public infrastructure at the moment.